Hey guys, just wanted to share a quick video about how Christ came in and changed my life, how he intervened on my behalf to save me from my sin. And so I'll just start at the beginning. I grew up in a church home. My parents were separated from the time I was about a year old. And so, there was a little, it was a little chaotic for a while growing up, but there were always people at different stages in my life that were there, especially on the spiritual side of things, that really poured into me. And it's amazing looking back how God used those people to shape who I am today. The first person was my great grandmother. She was the person that introduced me to the gospel the most often. She didn't raise me, but I stayed with her. She babysat me from the time I was about 6 weeks old till I was probably about 14. And so she was the one that was constantly telling me the gospel, reading the Bible to me, praying for me, praying with me. And as a kid, it was one of those things like I hated it in a lot of ways. It took me a long time, probably closer to her death, before I really appreciated that. But it was like when I was growing up, it was like, hey, I'm watching TV, I'm watching SportsCenter. Can you keep it down? But I never told her that. But it was just one of those like, okay. But it was those little nuggets of truth that she constantly told me over and over and over. That I look back on it as an adult, and those were critical. And so she's one of those people that I didn't know her before she was in her 70s, but she's one of those people that I want my faith to look like that. I want people to see Jesus in me, like I did in her. And so she was that first person. And as I started getting a little older, I got to age about 8 or 9, and there was a pastor's kid, and he kind of told me, kind of explained like Jesus' return to me. I mean, I guess the best a 9-year-old can. And it terrified me of like, Jesus is going to come back, and if I don't believe in him, this is what's going to happen. And so it was like, what happens to me when I die? Where do I go? So I started that. In that process, like, I started thinking, okay, I've got to be baptized. Like, to me, that was the answer. I had to be baptized. Because if I'm not, then I know what's going to happen. Jesus is going to come back, and that beast is going to come get me. Was my thought in all of it. And so it terrified me. But a few years went past. I avoided it for a long time. And then I started attending the youth group at our church. I didn't really want to go at first. It was awkward. I didn't really know anybody. We're always the people that we went on Sunday mornings. I'd been a part of like the Sunday school class, but it was very different from youth group. And so, I finally went, and the night we went, they weren't there. They had went out visiting. And I said, oh, well, forget it. So I went home, fired up the PlayStation, started playing some video games. Then sure enough, that night they showed up at my house. And I was like, all right. And so I go up, and I talk to them, and they invite me. So, well, all right, I'll come. So I started attending for a few weeks, and then there was a youth conference, this youth rally that was going on. It was this big event where they were singing, and they brought in a speaker, thousands of teenagers there, and I go, and the guy who was speaking, his name was David Nasser, and I remember hearing his story about how much he sacrificed to follow Jesus. He grew up in a Muslim background, and when he came to Christianity, came to follow Christ, he gave up everything. His family disowned him. He was basically banished from his family, and I said, wow. My family would probably actually be excited. It's like, so my sacrifice probably isn't that great. And so that night he gave an invitation, and it felt like it was like 40 minutes long. Just the invitation alone. It felt like he kept asking and asking and asking. And I don't know, he may have asked 4 times, but I remember like from the first time he said it, I was like, tonight's the night, I've got to do it. And there was a part of me that was like, maybe he'll quit asking. I just don't have to. I could just sit here. But he kept asking. I said, next time. If you ask again, I'll stand up. And I said about 10 times, I think. And then I finally did. And I went down and I prayed with a guy. Went home, told my family, told my pastor. He actually baptized me a few weeks later. But it was one of those, like I said earlier, it was one of those, like, I don't know that I fully understood what it meant to follow Jesus. Because I remember thinking when I was baptized that, okay, whew, I'm saved now. I'm good. Like, no matter what happens, I'm okay. But there was some truth to that, but it wasn't the baptism that I didn't understand that it wasn't the baptism that saved me. It was that Jesus saved me. And so it took a few years for all that to really sink in. Like, there was some change. I do think that was the point of my conversion. It was just how little I understood about it in the moment. And so, I started reading my Bible. I started praying more for a while. But there was no one at that point that really kind of took me under their wing. The youth pastor that we had got caught up in a scandal, ended up leaving the church for a while. And so for the next few years, I just kind of floundered. And then a new guy came in, was not trained in any way in ministry. It was just somebody who was really just a big kid himself. But he was about 20 years old, so we all thought he was amazing. And he was somebody that he didn't know how to teach us the Bible, but he did care for us on a relational level. So anytime we were doing something that was stupid, like, we knew he was going to hear about it and he was going to call us on it. So he was very great at holding us accountable. But he's also the same guy that we were at his house every weekend. His house was open to us every single weekend, and so we went over there and we'd hang out. And he loved it. He was living the bachelor life. He had a girlfriend, but they weren't living together. They weren't married yet. And so we kind of established that. And there's 3 or 4 of us that we went over there literally every weekend for a long time. So he got married, and his wife was fine with it continuing, so we did. Basically until we all went to college, we did it. But even to this day, he's still one of my best friends. He's still one of those people that I really base a lot of my ministry philosophy on, is because I know how much of an impact it made on me, just that time investment that he put in. And then shortly after that, right before I went to college, I met Tara. And when Tara and I started dating, she posed a lot of questions to me about my faith, about what I believe, things I'd never heard of, and I thought she was nuts. And so, but when she started posing those questions to me, I had to really start digging into my Bible in a way I never had before. And so shortly after that, I started attending church with her. And so the youth pastor that was at her church, their youth ministry was very different. I came from one that was about 40 kids, and it was about 40 minutes of hanging out and about 20 minutes of Bible study, to one that was about an hour of Bible study. So he was that next guy that really invested in me, that really showed me how to read the Bible, how to fall in love with the Word. He wasn't as good on the relational side of it, as we didn't hang out on the weekends or anything like that, but he was a critical piece in what it was. Like, he helped me develop a love for the Word, a love for Jesus that I hadn't known yet. Really helped me really understand what it meant to follow Jesus, what Jesus really did for me, and just the magnitude of my sin that had separated me from Christ. And so it was just, it's been fascinating just to look back over the course of my life and just looking at those people and how God brought me to where I am now. Because if it wasn't for each one of those, like, who knows where I would be? If it wasn't for my great-grandmother planting those truths at an early age, and the youth pastors who invested in me, and Tara coming in when she did, like, those are all people that made a significant impact on my life and my ministry. And so it's just been fascinating to see how God has changed me. Because when I was in high school, I was the most backwards and shy kid you could ever meet. When I first felt the call into ministry, I shared with both of my youth pastors, and one of them had offered to let me speak at a youth rally. And he'd ask me every time, he said, "Oh, you should do it. And I'm like, no, I can't do it. I'm too scared. And then he did on this one, knowing I would say no. But then I said yes, and it completely freaked him out. So I went and I preached at this youth rally. And it was by far the worst sermon that's ever been preached in the history of ever. It was about 9 minutes long, contained about 15 verses of me reading them and briefly explaining them, and then me just telling them I'm done and walking off the stage. And they had about 30 more minutes to fill before everything was ready for the meal afterward. So it's amazing to see how God has changed me from there to who I am now. I'm so thankful for the gospel and for those that invested in me and poured their time and energy into me. So I just wanted to thank you for listening. Appreciate all that for all of you that are a part of this story. Just thank you so much for what you have done in my life.